Hello and good morning. I am making a short video here and it's going to be part of a small series because I am starting something new. Sorry, I'm just fixing my camera here. I'm doing something very unusual, something that has not happened before. I am starting a new bolt action army. And I'm making a series of videos where I talk you through the process of starting that new army, and this one is going to be the background, the why I'm starting a new army. But other videos will be about how to list build and the thought process behind it, and hopefully I'll even do some battle reports or something with it at the end. So yeah, that is what is happening here. Um, I've said it before. I mainly play bold action because of competitive reasons. No, I only play bold action. It's my competitive jam. I like the system. I could basically play with bottle caps. It would make no difference to me as such. It's not as if I particularly enjoy find interesting World War II. My hobby jam is way earlier. I am a medieval, ancient fanboy. I adore the Napoleonic era and the uniforms and the pageantry of all that. Um, so for me, World War II is grimy, it's industrial, it's not nice. The ideas that led to that war are horrible. The effects on the civilian population. World War II is just not that interesting to me. Later wars are even worse for me. But I really enjoy bold action as a competitive sport. I like it a lot. So far I've just owned one army, but when I go back and when I look at what started me out as a wargamer, I'm looking at my grandfather and I'm looking at my uncles. My grandfather, he and I, we made like we made our own minis at some point, right? Um, Using lead and pouring it into molds and and then we painted them up. And I think a lot of the start of my idea of miniatures came from him. And my uncles left me little toy soldiers, like toys that they had owned when they were kids. So I have these little toy soldiers. These are Danish made. It's from a company called Reisler. They were made in the 1950s and 60s and were ubiquitous. I think the final production line stopped sometime in the 80s. Um, so if you're asking bold action players, some of them will remember these minis from when they were kids. Um, they had like a bunch of them or something. Um, they're a bit like the Green Army Men of the U.S. And I inherited a few from an uncle who's now sadly passed away. Um, and many of them have really been played with by kids. Some of them are okay, but many of them are broken down. Um, the sculpts are not great, but they are okay-ish. If you compare them to modern sculpts like Warlord Games and my personal favorite Perry miniatures, they're definitely not good. But I can work with them. And because they were my uncle's, my dead uncle, because they were his, and I've sort of kept them for a long time. Now, recently I discovered them in the attic, and I was like, that's fun. They reminded me of my uncle, right? And I picked them up, and I measured them. And these are 3 centimeter minis. They are 28 millimeter miniatures. And then I was like, but that's bolt action scale. That's what I usually do. Could they be used? Like, could I take these really old sculpts that I mainly keep because of my my uncle and bring them to life? Then I started researching a bit, and the miniatures themselves are not of a particular army, although they are copies of an American company that made miniatures in the same period. That were possibly American GIs, but these are sort of made to represent a Danish army of the post Second World War era. Danish army maybe 1948-50. But the equipment is not very precise. The helmets are not the Danish army of the Second World War. So I started looking around and seeing what might the equipment and the uniform. Could there maybe be a Second World War army that had equipment and uniforms that sort of looked like this? And I found it. The Czechoslovakian Army. The Czechoslovakian Army of 1938. Yes, they do not have the color that these miniatures has. These are sort of a grayish color with a green helmet, which makes no sense. But the Czechoslovakian Army had helmets that could maybe look a bit like my miniatures here. And the Czechoslovakian Army, as soon as I discovered that, I started checking out what the history was behind Czechoslovakia and the Second World War, and they didn't participate because they got murdered by the Munich Agreement in 1938. The appeasement policy of Chamberlain in 1938 was to give Hitler what he wanted. And Hitler at that point wanted the Germans of the Sudetenland to come heim ins Reich. That he wanted all Germans to be in the Greater Germany, especially after the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. And the Czechoslovakians were surrounded on 3 sides by Germany by that point. They had Prussia to the north. They had the main part of Germany to the west, and then they had Austria to the south. So they were surrounded by hostile nations demanding territory from them. And it's even worse because Ukraine and Poland also demanded parts of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was a multi-ethnic nation, so they were really pressured from all sides. And they, in the end, in 1938, they surrendered and abided by the agreement that the Western powers had made with Hitler, and they gave up the Sudetenland to Germany. Of course, Hitler ended up taking all of Czechoslovakia, but, well, his territorial ambitions were well known, right? But there is an interesting what if. Because there was one battle where one Czechoslovakian unit under one officer resisted the Germans and fought it out in their barracks against the Germans and caused several casualties, fatalities also in the German attackers. So there is an interesting what if here. What if Czechoslovakia had not surrendered in 1938? If they hadn't surrendered, World War II might have started a year or 2 earlier. And that is what I want to make. That is what I want to do with my minis. I am making a Czechoslovakian army of 1938. So that's the theme. I'm very weird for me. I'm thinking of a theme. I'm making a Czechoslovakian army. The Czechoslovakian army of that period was fairly modern. It had very good equipment, so good equipment actually that when the Germans took over Czechoslovakia, they took over the armament industry and they took over the tanks, especially the Panzer 38Ts, which went straight into the German army and were part of the early war German army. So that is what I want to do. I want to do that Czechoslovakian defense force that tries to fight off the German aggressors in 1938. Very modern, very well equipped with tanks. They had a lot of border fortifications, especially facing Germany, not too much towards Austria, which was part of the problem for them. My next problem was, so how do I represent this? And where do I get the minis? Because I only had like 20 minutes minis, and for most armies, that 20 minis is not enough. I need more infantry. I need different types. I need artillerymen. I need snipers. Everything was like. So I went online, and I bought a bunch of old minis. Antiques. I went antique shopping, and I bought a huge pile of these minis. I got them fairly cheap, but more expensive than if you were going for something modern, something that Warlord Games had made. And I think I'm going to cut some of them up and maybe do so they're not so monopose. I think I'm going to try and see if I can sort of rearrange some arms or something, maybe some heads, and then I'm going to paint them up. I also went online and bought a bunch of old Dinky Toys, which was a British company that made military toys, and they are scaled 1 to 50. So basically almost where I want them to be. Since I'm mainly using Perry models for most of my armies, then 1 to 50 is actually a pretty okay scale. I bought some cannons, and I bought some jeeps and armored cars and stuff, and I'm going to look into what I can use of that. So the whole premise is I'm buying basically antique toys and making them into a bold action army. That's my idea. That's what I'm going to do. And that was the background and the theme of it. Next time I'm going to talk list building and how to make this sort of competitive. Cheers.